In the meanwhile, while all the other teachers are joining and we have a couple of minutes on our hands, a simple question for all of you. What do you think differentiates a good teacher from a great teacher? Whatever your thoughts are, please put them on the comments. We'll discuss this during the session. What do you think distinguishes between, what is the difference between a good teacher and a great teacher? Whatever your thoughts,
Sir,
please put.
sir, can I?
Yes, ma'am. We can put them on the comments till the time everyone is joining in, and then we can start. Okay.
Okay.
I guess everyone is
Himanshu, we can take
present
some
already.
responses, right, apart from the chat box also, if Sonia ma'am wants to share.
Sure. Yes, Sonia, ma'am.
Sir, I think a good teacher can explain any concept, whatever concept she taught, and a great teacher can demonstrate. She demonstrate to, for example, if she want to teach anything, she want to demonstrate that for children to learn it very well, and that can use them in future also.
Right, right. Very, very well put down, ma'am. So, good teacher only teaches, but a great teacher also demonstrates. I had another comment: a good teacher teaches, but a great teacher motivates. Great teachers inspire. Anything else? A great teacher learns along with teaching. Very well said, Ishita, ma'am. A great teacher teaches the concept. A good teacher teaches the concept. A great teacher teaches values. Okay, a great teacher is also supposed to teach concepts. If no concepts, then no learning. But I get what you're trying to say, ma'am. So, yes, along with concepts, there are also other values that we need to add. Okay, so on that thought, not taking too much time, we will start with today's session. Is my screen visible to all of you?
Yes.
Yes. So on that note, we start. I start with a very wishing you all a very happy belated Teachers' Day. I am sorry I could reach out to only a few of all of you yesterday. That's why I'm wishing you a little late, but wishing you a very happy Teachers' Day. And it's amazing to see that how you all have thoughts on shifting from a good teacher to great teacher. I'm sure all of you are already practicing all these things which you mentioned on the chat box in your classrooms as well. And I really probably later will hear some more inspiring stories of how you make these small changes in classroom and how do you think it affects students' life. Coming back to the agenda for today, why we are meeting here today, is discussing the art and science of question making. Just for a little bit of a recap, we've already discussed a little on competency based questions, how to create multiple choice questions, how to create free response questions, and we've understood a little about Bloom's taxonomy and how Bloom's taxonomy works. Today will be an amalgamation of all that we've learned plus a little new concepts so that we can ensure that after this we are able to make a good competency based question confidently. Before we move on to that, just a reminder or just a recall of why this session is important or why why we're discussing competency based questions today. So I'm sure most of you might have gone through the NAP, attended some session, heard about it from your principal, from your peers, from your friends. NAP talks a lot about assessment.
Turn off the
If I can request everyone to mute, please. Thank you. Great. So NAPA talks a lot about assessment reform. One part, yes, being the competency-based questions. The others being continuous tracking of the child. Continuous learning outcomes of the child should be tracked. Board exams would be more flexible in times to come. Assessment would be focused on core concepts, higher order thinking, and foundational skills, which are our competency-based questions. You will have self-assessments and peer assessments. the the government is working towards strengthening the NTA, which is the National Testing Agency, which EI as a company is also very closely related with and associated with, wherein they also plan in introducing a high quality common aptitude test for students, as well as bring in synergy in board exams created by various boards of assessments. So currently, as teachers, we understand the difference between a CBSE board versus an ICSE board versus an IGCSE board. But for students, they in their minds always have this misconception that ICSE है तो ज्यादा लिखना पड़ेगा, CBSE है तो ज्यादा rote learning होगी, IGCSE है तो कम पढ़ना पड़ेगा, marks ज्यादा easily आ जाएंगे. Every student, every city, every town has their own different set of notions, every different set of misconceptions that different boards teach differently and aim at different goals. However, this is not true. Everyone, all the schools that are teaching in India, be it a CBSE, be it a state board, or be it an ICSE, all are aiming towards an end goal which is mentioned in the NEP. The ways of teaching, the pedagogies are different, but majorly the end goal remains the same. And now this will be highlighted in the board exams as well. And the government is also thinking of AI based softwares to help the schools track the progress of students. So today you may feel that this, exams are just another thing of our daily routine, but tomorrow it's going to be a very important part of what we are doing. I'm sure even it is today, but the way we are assessing students currently is going to change drastically in the next couple of months, couple of years. Everyone, I'm sure, by now might have seen this newspaper article. It's all over the news. The government recently announced this for classes 11th and 12th also, that the competency based questions are going to increase for the 24 boards. The weightage for upcoming year is now estimated to be 50%. Up till last year, it was 40% is what they were claiming. And now they're saying that 50% will be the weightage of competency based questions. And the idea is only for these competency based questions to increase. So this is why I would request for the next half an hour to 45 minutes, please listen with great attention. If there is any question, please feel free to ask. I'm here to solve all your doubts. Coming back, the aim or the goal of why we are discussing this, competency based questions. Can anyone help me understand what are competency based questions? Uh, Anyone, if you can please unmute yourself and help me answer what are competency based questions. Nobody?
Questions which are connecting to real life and developing logic and critical thinking as well, instead of direct question which connect to the real life.
Okay. So
Case
case based
based.
questions, assertion, reasoning questions, questions which are skill based, on logic based. Smriti ma'am has their hand raised. Smriti ma'am, would you
Uh,
want to add
yes,
something?
yes, sir. The questions which require students to think beyond whatever the concept memorized by them
Okay.
and apply
Whatever.
current scenario, matlab real life situations.
Okay. So any concept which is memorized by them and they can use it in a real life scenario.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's do this in a more engaging manner. I have a question in front of all of you. What are competency based questions? Whatever you think your answer is, please put it in the chat box. A, B, C, or D. I know most of you understand what competency based questions are. This is just to give a little more clarity for some of the new members here, some of them who probably don't know that well. A question in front of you, four options A, B, C, D. आपके हिसाब से सही ऑप्शन क्या होना चाहिए? Okay. B, B. Most of us going with B. Okay. Anyone who thinks the answer is anything but B? Anything apart from B? Okay, can I have anyone from the Nagpur campus probably explain why option A is not the correct option? Anyone from the Nagpur campus, if you can please unmute and help us understand why is option A not the correct answer? Oh, yes, ma'am, you don't need to raise your hand. You can just unmute and speak. Pallavi, ma'am.
So competency based questions are one part can be factual, but it's not just because application part like Mount Everest is an example of four mountains, but you know the application that still the height is increasing, that has to be
Mhm.
understood by the child. So it cannot be only based on factual questions.
Right. Perfect. Perfect. And anyone from the Nashik campus can help me understand why is C and D not the correct option?
Yeah, so C is not a correct option because ultimately summarizing information is not the motive. The
Okay.
motive behind the question is to apply the skills of the child, and D is not a correct answer because it should not be focusing on evaluating or analyzing the students, handwriting or presentation skills. It is purely should be maybe spelling mistakes can be overlooked or when it is compared to applying skills over here.
Right. That's perfect, ma'am. Very well answered, Pallavi, ma'am, and Prajakta, ma'am. So yes, option A, C, and D are the incorrect answers. Competency-based questions are fairly, as we all understand correctly, are those questions which are designed to assess the student's ability to apply the skills that they have learned, apply the knowledge that they have gained across all the days that we've been teaching them, and their behaviors in real life situations as well. Coming down to the core of the discussion today, how to design these competency based questions. We fairly discussed this in the past. This is just giving it a little more insights. Now, for example, a sample class, usually the way we go and we teach it in schools, the class teacher will walk in, they have a lesson plan they have with them. The lesson plan has certain instructions as to what to teach, what are the topics that we are going to cover. We then start teaching, and after we've taught them all the concepts, we'll take an exam of the students. When the examination is done, we see as to what the students know, what the students don't know. Basically, we generate a report card. This is what used to happen in our regular day teaching. So we started teaching, there was a lesson plan, there was the execution of the lesson plan, there was the assessment, and then there was the diagnosis and result. So while a lot of research was happening over what can be done better to improve this classroom teaching practice, just like we hear about Bloom's taxonomy, just like we hear about CPA, just like we hear about all other teaching pedagogies that you all might have come across, the backward design process, or the UBD, Universal Backward Design Process, was evolved. Now, universal backward design is just for our understanding or information. This is the path that we are following, or we want you to understand that what we are telling you to do is only logical, it's only proven, it's only tried and tested. So, as per UBD, the way we were teaching in our classroom changes totally. What is UBD? We won't go into details. Just need to understand that UBD said that what we are doing currently in the classroom is not the best way of teaching. We first need to have a set of desired results. Our learning outcomes, our learning indicators in our hand first. We need to know what our children will end at the end of the 40 minutes when we are going to teach them. Basis that, we design our assessments. So assessments will now be designed on the learning outcomes, not the other way around, basis what we've taught them or what their textbook has. And basis on their examination, the learning plan or how we are going to teach the student is designed. So some of you might have heard of this UBD before. Some of you might be following this while designing the lesson plans. However,
Sorry to
yes,
interrupt. If you remember, I've shared the entire plan that we are
precisely.
following till grade 8.
Precisely. So I understand the school follows UBD to a great extent in the way we are doing our planning. We are now just focusing on the assessment bit. So this is how assessments will be drafted. Traditionally, how assessments were made, or how till today I used to make my exams papers were that I used to take my textbook, whatever I'm teaching from the textbook. Once I've finished teaching, I used to make a general understanding that, okay, my students know so much, they don't know so much, considering which I would decide I'll make an easy paper. And most of the questions would be out of the textbook that I have finished teaching my students, not focusing on what the learning outcomes are. Now, the way the CBSE wants all of us to design our question papers are keeping in mind our learning outcomes on the top, which again brings us back to you start using UBD, which the school to a greater extent is already using. We'll just focus on the assessment evidence part where we will first focus on what is the desired result that we want while we are teaching a lesson. So, from today, whenever you go to a classroom, along with your lesson plans that we already have, probably, just think a little bit deeper that what is the end goal that you want to achieve. Once you have your end goal in mind, we will try and draft our examinations or assessments basis that particular learning outcomes. So, breaking it into more simpler parts, the first step of having to design a competency based question is having your desired outcome listed. This is a screenshot from the school planner that we already use, wherein you'll already have the themes and the outcomes that we are aiming to achieve from teaching this particular topic. I'm sure most of you have access to this. We can see how this works. We have a generic idea of what we want to achieve when we are going into the classroom. Now, either physically or either manually, either in your mind or either using a pen and paper, however time permits, I would want you or I would suggest you to divide your learning outcomes into three parts. This is what CBD, this will make your process of creating a question very simpler. So when you are teaching a particular chapter, you know that some questions are important to know, or some topics are important to know. Some are good to know. But these are four concepts which are very important to understand, and the students need to have them throughout their journey. So, this is a concept which will help him not only today to pass this examination, but also all further examination he or she will have to appear for. So, either on a pen and paper or either mentally, we will now start dividing our learning outcomes into key ideas and concepts, and then it will be easier for us to rationalize or basically give a weightage of what, how, where my question should be framed for. We'll understand this with a very simple example. We'll divide this particular example that we're seeing of angles into these three parts, and we'll see how it helps us create questions using Bloom's taxonomy. So we divided those three outcomes that we saw on the chapter of angles into good to know, important to know, and enduring understanding. So basically, what does this ask us to do? Explore the idea of angles and shapes, classify angles into right angle, acute angle, obtuse angle, represent the same by drawing and tracing. We broke it down into what is good to know. It's good if you know all the names of the angles. If you know that there are three types of angles, four types of angles, it is very great. If you understand to draw an angle, you would need a protractor, you would need a compass. It's great. What is more important to know is you need to know how to measure and classify angles. Now, please understand the stark difference between recognizing and measuring. So, if you only know what is an acute angle and obtuse angle, but you don't know their exact measurement, it means that probably you've just memorized or rote learned the names, but the concept of, okay, a acute angle is less than 60, less than 90, a right angle is 90, an obtuse angle is greater than 90. These are concepts which are probably not 100% clear in your mind. What I have seen most educators do is they are drafting questions basis on whether a student can identify and name angle. So they'll give them a question, they'll have three different types of angles put there, and they'll simply ask, okay, which is an acute, which is an obtuse, or which is a right, or which of the following as per you is an acute angle. Now, for a student to see the shapes, memorize the shape that he's seen in the textbook and answer the question is good. But until and unless he knows the exact measure, it is going to be of no help to that student. Similarly, if the student can identify and recognize the angles in the real world, and he can understand the sum of angles in basic shapes, these are all the important to know outcomes. This is where my focus will be more on. And then we have some enduring understanding outcomes, which basically are the most important part when we are teaching the student. So now, apart from being able to, name the angle and measure the angle, I also want the student should understand how angles can be used in construction, art, design, anywhere else where angles are used. You should be able to apply these concepts of angles to solve problems, and you should relate angles to a broader mathematical concept. See how angles connect to, symmetry, rotations, formations, all the others. I am not a math educator. Ma'am, I'm sorry, I couldn't read your comment. If you have something to say, if you can please unmute and say.
Sir, very good evening to you. I was listening to
Good
you, and it's
evening.
very nice to know more about UBD. I have already done a workshop with Miss Aarti Pathak,
Oh,
and
great.
I realized the importance of performance task and unit by design, whereby the students learn each and every topic in bits and pieces. You just now said that educators frame question where the children name the angles, but I'm really sorry to say that I have seen students measuring angles with the help of protractors and with the help of a compass present in a geometry box. So it's not the right thing to say. I'm sorry if it hurts you, but it's really like that.
No, of course not, ma'am. I'm just giving a general perception that asking a question which is directly whether an angle is acute or obtuse is not wrong. I'm just saying that we need to now shift our focus from there to there. And this is not pointing a particular teacher or a particular school. This is generic from across 10,000 schools that me as an individual along with my company work with. This is a general feedback that we saw across the questions that were being framed by these teachers. So this is not particular to this campus. DPS as a campus is much more evolved in their assessment practices.
Of
Totally
course, of
agree.
course. Thank you so much,
Yes.
sir.
But the idea is to understand what is right and what is wrong. So tomorrow, let's just say there is a third party paper that is coming in, or as a teacher, we need to understand what is the difference between a question which is only good to know and which actually can endure understanding. That is why, just to show a spark difference, is where I'm mentioning that example, ma'am. Not to hurt anyone's feelings. I'm sorry if I did that. So coming back to the concepts, we are now planning to divide. I would suggest to divide your learning outcomes in what is good to know, what is important to know, and what will actually endure understanding. This makes our framing process of questions much more easier, which we're going to see up ahead. So currently what we've done to frame a good question is, first, we've listed down the outcomes that we would want. Second, either mentally, either on a paper, whatever is more convenient to you, we list down the learning outcomes into three parts: good, important, and actually enduring understanding. And then we focus on what aspects can be used while we're designing these questions. Bloom's taxonomy, I'm sure everyone is aware. Is there anyone who doesn't understand Bloom's taxonomy and wants a quick understanding of the same? Nobody. Okay. Moving forward. Now to draft a question, we will keep our Bloom's taxonomy chart in hand just to understand what all are the levels where the questions can be drafted. And then we start drafting our questions basis the Bloom's taxonomy. Now, keeping in mind the concepts that we had earlier decided, which were good to know, important to know, and enduring understanding. So, before I move on to that, as per all of you, very simple although, uh, at what level of Bloom's taxonomy you think the questions will be there, which will be focusing on enduring understanding? Applying, okay.
So can you please repeat the question?
Sure. So, ma'am, my question is Bloom's taxonomy has 6 levels that we are all aware of. Now, when we want to make a question, and we discussed earlier that our learning outcomes can be divided into three parts, which are good to know, which are important to know, and which actually endure understanding. So, as per you, at what level will the learning outcomes from enduring understanding can be applied to create a question?
So evaluating and creating.
Right. Evaluating and creating, applying, analyzing, apply and above, creating. Correct. So basically, now when we draft a question, we know that there are two things that we need to keep in mind. First is our Bloom's taxonomy. Second is how we divided our learning outcomes into a couple of different parts. So to start with, just explaining the same example up ahead. If a question is asked, what are the different types of angles? Name and define each type. The answer would be acute angle, obtuse angle, right angle, straight angle, whatever. This is a direct example of a remembering question, of the remembering level. But is this a question that is checking the student's application? Is it checking the student's understanding? No. This is basically, if the students know this, it is good for them. It's good to know. It gives them a little clarity. We know that their base concepts are clear. However, this is not what our end goal is to achieve as per the chart if we see up here. So if he knows the names of angles, it's good. However, he should actually be able to understand the role of angles in geometry. So now when you are actually designing your question papers, when we are asking questions in a classroom just to check students if they remember, if they understand, these are the type of questions that we can use, wherein we are only checking how much have they recollected from whatever was taught previously. Again, going to the second level, explain the meaning of concepts. To explain the meaning of concepts, what is the difference between a right angle and obtuse angle? If a student is able to answer to this question, again, this is a good to know aspect that he fairly understands what a right angle is or what a obtuse angle is. Again, it's a good to know. It's not probably an important to know. However, if we come down to the third level of applying, of drafting a question as per Bloom's taxonomy of the level applying, you'll see that an example question that I'm posing in front of you. If two angles of triangle measure 40 and 50, calculate the measure of the third angle. Now to answer this particular question, I'll repeat once again. So just assume that we now have to draft a question basis the applying level, and we need to make sure that we are focusing on a skill which is important for the student to know. So what we will do is we will go back and we will see, okay, what are important skills? Students should be able to measure and classify angles. They should understand the sum of angles in basic life. So considering this learning outcome is what we can probably use over here and draft a question basing that particular learning outcome, that we had classified as an important to know. So to simplify this, whenever you're drafting a question, keeping the remembering and understanding level in mind, ensure that the outcomes that we are focusing on are the good to know outcomes. Whenever you're drafting a question on applying and analyzing, we will try to ensure that these are the important to know learning outcomes. And when we are drafting a question on evaluating and creating, we will try to focus on all the enduring understanding concepts so that we have a fair bit of balance and we understand that all the aspects of the students are covered. We'll see this example further and then you'll have a clearer understanding. I am assuming it might be a little confusing as of now, but once I end this explanation, I think it will be easier for us to understand. I'll in fact just skip a little up ahead. So there. Again, we asked a simple question. What are the different types of angles? Name and define each type. To design this angle, what did we do? We had a learning outcome which we had earlier decided, which is a good to learn learning outcome. This is good, but it is not very important for the students. Academically, it may not help them in upcoming times, but this is just important for us to ensure that they are on the right track. So we take this outcome and we draft a fairly easy question for them as per the Bloom's remembering level. And the question is being on the learning outcome that we had earlier designed that students should be able to recognize different types of angles. On the other hand, when we ask the students a more important to know aspect, we will focus on the applying and the analyzing parts of the Bloom's level, where we will tell them, okay, what is the outcome that we are wanting to achieve? Students should be able to understand the sum of angles in basic shapes. This is the outcome that we have listed. So now we will try and draft a question basis these learning outcomes as per first the applying level, which is if you measure the angles of a triangle, measure 40 and 50, calculate what is the third angle. Over here, what the students are doing, they are actually using their knowledge that they have learned of understanding the sum of angles in the basic shapes, which is what our learning outcome is. Similarly, for having a more evaluating question, you can ask them analyze how angles in a quadrilateral relate to each other, explain the sum of angles and how it affects to each other in a shape. This is again a question that you can ask, which is basis on the learning outcome that we had earlier decided, which is an important to know learning concept, which is understanding the sum of angles in basic shape. Similarly, understanding the roles of angles in geometry, construction, art and craft, this is what our enduring understanding outcome is. So when you're actually drafting a more challenging question for the student or a competency based question for the student, which is focusing on evaluation and creating, we can ensure that it actually aims at achieving the outcome which we had listed down as enduring understanding. So you'll see that a carpenter claims that two angles measuring 80 and 110 form a supplementary pair. Does this validate? This is a real life question. This is a case study which may happen, not exactly a case study, but if you were to say this is a real life example which may occur in today my life also, despite me nothing to have to do with mathematics. Considering which we will try and ask more of these type of questions. And coming down to the creating bit, we will ask them to design a floor where two adjacent walls form a right angle and another set of walls that form complementary angles. Show your calculations and justify the design. Now this is a competency type of question that I'm asking my students at the end of my exam probably, just to check whether they've understood how angles actually contribute in construction as well. So what we are trying to achieve is, now when you have your learning outcomes in mind and you have your Bloom's chart in mind, this is a chart which I'm sure all of you have seen. You will keep this chart with you. Due to size issues, somehow this chart only highlights the English aspects, not the maths aspects that detailed. I'll share a detailed chart with all of you as well. So just look at this chart while you're drafting a question. Keep your learning outcome in mind and then start drafting your question. So, for example, today you have to ask a question to any student, and your only outcome is you want to check if that student is attentive in your classroom. You know, for the last benchers, for the back benchers, you know that they were probably not very attentive, and you just want to do an attentive check. Then what you will do, you will say that, okay, XYZ, Himanshu, stand up. Tell me if you can recall all the angles that I had taught in class. So you will use recall, which is a part of the Bloom's taxonomy chart, and aim at what skills? The good to know skills, which, as per the example that we are discussing, the student should know only the names of angles. That is enough. Now let's just assume you're giving them something for homework, and you need to know that fairly bit that after 40 minutes of teaching, whether my students were able to actually understand what I was teaching in class or no. So then you can tell them, give them a question. Okay, there are two angles, identify out of them which is the right angle triangle. Again, what you're doing is you're using the verb mentioned in the Bloom's taxonomy chart, which is identify, and you're focusing on a good to know or an important to know learning outcome. When you're actually doing a class test of a particular chapter, let's say a weekly test or a monthly test, there we will focus more on application and analysis questions, where we'll say, okay, there are two angles, one is of 60 and the other is of 20 to complete this particular shape, which the third angle should be of how many, what should be the weightage of the third angle. So you're asking them to solve a problem, or you're asking them to analyze a problem. This is where you can have, in a comparatively more serious class test or a more serious weekly test, whatever pattern we are following. And when you're actually drafting an exam paper, be it a PT1 paper, be it your half yearly paper, ensure that you are covering all the aspects, where now the focus shifts from your remembering, understanding, application, and analysis more towards evaluating and creating as well. Now, the weightage of this, I leave all of you all to decide. What I would personally suggest would be a 50-50 in class tests. So a 50% remembering, understanding questions in your class test versus a 50% of application, analyzing, evaluation, and creating. Because class tests comparatively hold little value. As in, that is not something that the student will fear too much if he's got comparatively weaker scores in. And when you are actually giving him the PT1 exam or your half-yearly exam papers, when we're designing that, we can have more focus. We can have like a 60-40 ratio or a 70-30 ratio, whatever the school practice is, ensuring that we are also including understanding application questions where we can actually gauge whether the student is understanding or not. So just to sum this up, I will come back to our table once again. So whenever you go and teach a particular aspect in classroom, however small that topic or subtopic may be, either mentally, either on a piece of paper, divide them into 3 parts. Once you do this, even mentally, more than 90% of your work is done. You know that these are aspects which are only good to know. These are important to know. They may be asked in the board paper also. And these are enduring understanding questions. So these are questions which are competency based questions, which as per the new board policy will comprise of 50% weightage of my exam papers. So now when you list your outcomes and you divide them into 3 parts, you exactly know what to assess and how to assess. I feel this. Vrunda ma'am,
Yes, sir, sorry to interrupt.
Not
In the earlier slide, you have shown what kind of questions fall under each level of Bloom's taxonomy. So I
Yes.
feel that classify shouldn't fall under understanding. It should fall under application or analysis.
uh, are you talking of this chart, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Okay, ma'am. So this is the chart I've as per the Bloom's taxonomy. This is not something that I have created. A more detailed version of this chart is something I can share with you. But yes, taking your point, just don't follow these verbs blindly. So when you're actually drafting a question, make sure that it makes sense. So for example, saying that demonstrate the difference between, or for example, uh, produce a right angle triangle uh, in a quadrilateral, let's just say. So make a quadrilateral which will have a right angle triangle and other angles as well. Create that kind of an angle. So as per that, sketching, as per this particular table, sketching, showing, practicing, and producing is it's basically an application. However, if you are asking this question to a student, it actually goes at creating level. So we will not go into the literal value of it. We just have to see the thought process behind it. That when you are drafting a question, this is like a ready reckoner that you can use, but use it with caution. This will end up correct 80% of the times with the correct thought process in mind. If you randomly use it, it may not. So the idea is you design your learning outcomes as per good, important, and understanding. You then put your Bloom's levels down there, and all your good, all the good to know learning outcomes come under understanding and remembering level. So we try and draft questions basis the same, and similar process follows. Important come under application and analysis, and uh, your understanding come under evaluation and creating. Again, this is a breakup I am giving you for general understanding. It doesn't mean that an important question you will not ask for remembering and understanding. But that is the thought process that we will work with to try and start creating questions which are more competency based, and also ensuring that the students are now able to answer the different kind of questions that we are asking them to answer, not corely focusing on root. So these are just tips and tricks which we use, ma'am, so that initially it becomes easier for us to draft. Eventually, once you start making these questions in due course of time and with practice, you will learn. This is just a ready reckoner that you can use. We have another hand raised. I'll just take up this question and move forward in the interest of time.
Sir, I just wanted to ask, when we assess the papers or when we make the papers, I guess the knowledge, understand, applying, all these quadrants are already decided by the boards. I mean, we don't look into it, I guess. I mean, there is a percentage that is already given to us. Accordingly, we do it, right? I'm just asking like that. Because when we make a question paper or any assessment paper, if I'm not wrong, so the knowledge, understanding, and applying, suppose if I'm just giving an example, or knowledge could be of 20%, understanding could be of 30%, and applying is of 30%. That is already decided, I guess. That's what I was just getting confused. Aarti ma'am, is it decided already by the
So
boards?
it has been given by board also, and schools also decide at their end for what classes or class groups, what should be the ratio of these different domains. Yes, and we follow CBSE pattern, of
CBSE
course.
pattern, yeah.
We as a school decide that what should be the ratio of this percentage of division, percentage of question for different domains.
So I just wanted to ask this, so confirm it. Thank you, ma'am. Yes. thank you.
Precisely. So, ma'am, right now, from discussion point of view, so till now, whatever we are doing as core assessments, that is great. But because competency-based questions is a comparatively newer term that has been introduced, not all teachers might be asking these questions in their classrooms. Earlier, before NEP actually came on board and said that we will have only application-based questions and they'll be asked in the boards as well. So the topic of debate right now is that while we are asking questions in the classroom, and these are, when we are teaching, after 20 minutes, we take a pause and write down 2 questions on the board for students to answer, or just generally in the classroom after finishing a subtopic, there are questions that we call out to students to answer. these particular questions should now focus, that questions focus should slowly change from remembering to actually the evaluating and creating level. That is the point of discussion. So eventually, the exam papers, the weightage has to be decided. But we need to ensure that our students, so we know as a school, or let's just say I as a teacher know that if today my student is asked the question on a remembering or an understanding level, he will score, let's say, an 80 on 100. However, if he is asked the question only on evaluating and creating level, which are more competency based questions, I am assuming he will score a 50 on or a 70 on 100. He will lose those 10 marks due to lack of practice, due to lack of exposure. So the idea is, once we learn how to draft these type of questions, so when you are actually creating your lesson plan, or when you're creating your teacher diary for the notes, when you will now go into the class and teach, you can include a blend of not only the remembering and understanding questions, but the creating questions as well. So tomorrow, let's just say an external agency comes and gives you a question paper. Let's just say CBSE, for example, like they are drafting the board paper. We as teachers are confident and we know that the students will be able to answer all the questions at whatever level they may be. So the idea is to understand and learn how to draft all the kind of questions. The relevance, the use and the relevance may change as per the classes that we are teaching, the board that we are, a lot of other aspects included. But as a teacher, we need to understand and be able to draft all the type of questions. That is the end goal. Okay, so we had done this incomplete exercise before earlier. Just to complete this very quickly in interest of time, I'll take 3 responses. Look at this picture that is there in front of you. What are the 3 questions that come to your mind? Ask those questions. You can put them on chat, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask. So what we're trying to do over here is we're doing an activity where we're seeing that how our mind thinks of questions and what can be changed. So look at this image in front of you. What are the 3 questions that can come to your mind? You have to ask questions basis this image. What is the man picking up? Okay. What is the chemical he is collecting? Which is the chemical he is collecting? Okay. I'll take one more question. What is the purpose of collecting the sample? Why is the person wearing a protective gear? Okay. Thank you. Why is the person collecting the water in the bottle? Okay, great. Great. We'll just pause here. So now, as a general behavior, this is for everyone. The way we start thinking is what, where, when, which, who, why, and how. These are basic ways of asking questions. So earlier when we saw an initial couple of questions, what is this man doing? What chemical is he collecting? What is he searching in water? These are the questions that initially came up. Correct? This is the most generic question that can come to our mind. What we now have to try and do is, when you're asking a question, and this is for when you're asking a question in your classroom, try and go from top to bottom. And the further you will go, the more complex your questions will be. I also see a few complex questions on the chat box. I will discuss them when I'm discussing this. So, why might water testing be useful? Who might solve the problem of water quality? Automatically, you see over here, the quality of questions that we are asking has improved by a bit. Again, this is a hack. This is a ready reckoner which we can use initially when we are drafting our questions. Just try to include more of the question matrix going from top to bottom, and you'll see that the questions quality will improve and will automatically be more focused on application based, more understanding based, more evaluating and creating based. So what could be the effects of poor water quality? Again, that is a question that can be drafted from that image. However, generally how any brain would think would be that, okay, what is this matter? So what I'm trying to say is all of us are capable of doing this, and we just have to start shifting our question making process down further. I'll be sharing this matrix with you so all of you all can start using this and in your classrooms and see how amazing and how easy it is and how different responses you get from students. I'll just take a pause over here. Any doubts, any questions? Okay. Assuming that there are no doubts and questions, I'll be moving forward. We will now, so far we discussed three major aspects. One was we will list our learning outcomes. Second is we will divide our learning outcomes as per different levels. Third is we will then use either we'll use the Bloom's taxonomy chart, select the correct verbs as per each and every level, and draft our questions based on Bloom's taxonomy to ensure that our questions are competency based. We'll include more real life examples. All the types that are to be included, we'll be discussing them further in the next 5 minutes. But we'll ensure that these are three aspects that are taken care of. Also, we'll ensure that when we are asking the simpler questions at the remembering and understanding level, these questions are basically from the good to know aspects of our learning outcomes, versus when we are asking the more complicated questions from application and above level, these can be on either the important to know aspects or the creative aspects. Once we actually have this bifurcation, drafting a question becomes easier. And initially, I'm sure all of you all have done this process earlier. We all can make competency based questions, but this is again a question matrix that we can use to draft more complex questions, and how using this matrix, how you can ensure that the questions are more competency based, more application based. Okay. Again, few aspects that we need to keep in mind while drafting our competency based questions. We've discussed them fairly before, so I'll just quickly highlight the three most important. Please test only concepts and not test concepts and core knowledge, not peripheral facts. So this example, define a peninsula versus identify the characteristics that are common to all the regions shaded on the map. Again, if you ask this question, you can actually see that students actually understand what a peninsula means rather than they've just learned the meaning of peninsula. So try and include more of these questions in your competency based questions. Use questions which are unfamiliar in the way that they're framed or their concepts. So please don't take questions from back of the textbook directly and ask them to the students, but actually try and draft a question basis their learning outcomes that we have earlier decided, and try to have more unfamiliar questions, because if the questions are something that the students have earlier seen, they will again use their rote learning technique, and they'll just say out whatever they know, whatever they remember, rather than actually applying a thought to it. Okay. One question in front of you. Is this a good question? Is this a bad question? Anybody? I'm sorry, it's 6 o'clock. I'll be extending my time by only 5 minutes. Anybody? Good question, bad question? This is the question that you see on screen. Anybody?
Yeah, good question, sir.
Okay, Prajakta ma'am says good question. Pushpendra ma'am said bad question. Siddharth sir says bad question. Only 3 responses.
So what is the learning outcome that is being tested with?
Okay, let's just assume that the learning outcome being tested is whether he is able to comprehend this particular concept properly and whether he knows the correct spelling of didn't. Grammar and incorrection. Okay. Anyone who
Then
thinks
it's a good question.
Okay, Vrinda ma'am thinks it's a good question, fairly well enough. Anyone who thinks bad question, if you can explain why bad, if you can please quickly unmute and explain why bad. good for spell check.
Sir, may
ये
I?
किस स्टैंडर्ड का है सर? एक्सक्यूज मी. 6 to 8 में which standard? 6, 7
मैम
or 8?
कोई भी पकड़ लीजिए, 8th.
अच्छा, okay. तो
So
spelling
the
check
options are testing only the spelling error. The application part, what should be used, option should be given, like the distractor should be proper.
Okay. Okay. Fairly enough. So, uh, just to sum this all up, assuming that this is a class 8th question and our learning outcome for this particular question was just checking the spelling, if somebody were to ask me if whether after that also this question is good or bad, I would say that it is bad. Reason being, first, and these are things that we need to keep in mind, there is an unnecessary reading load. So I have put down 2 sentences just to check one spelling. Secondly, the vocabulary that I have used is very, very difficult. It's not helping me achieve any learning outcome. So instead of saying indispensable, I could have used an easier word. Instead of saying irking, I could have used an easier vocabulary. Using a difficult vocabulary is just making the question sound more complex or look more complex. It's actually not making it complex. And third, the way the question is formed, it's stereotyping the elderly. It's saying that grandfathers can't use phones. So this is something we have to take care of when we are drafting a question, or this is a good practice while we are making a question. Unnecessary using difficult terms does not make your question a competency based question. What makes your question competency based? If it's actually application based, if the student is actually being able to apply some of the knowledge to that particular question, is where you can claim it to be a competency based question. So try and avoid using unnecessarily difficult vocabulary in a question until and unless it's for a reason. So I'm just using this as an example to explain my idea of don't use difficult vocabulary. But for all of those, the reasons why we said it's a good, or for the reasons that we said it's a bad, fairly all the reasons are correct. I'm not denying any. But the idea is, if avoided, the question could be a better question. If it could be a single liner just for assessing this small aspect, if we could avoid the difficult vocabulary, and we could work on the way it's being framed. So just to sum up, these are concepts that we've gone through earlier in the past. I'm just quickly going through them once again. If any one of you has a doubt, you can stay back after the session and ask. I'll be happy to answer. So when you're drafting a question, ensure that you're testing understanding of concepts and not just recall of facts. You're testing core learning and not facts. You're using unfamiliar context to identify real identity. Like we saw the question earlier, the concept remains the same, the learning outcome remains the same, but the way we are asking question is changed. Test what is intended to be tested. Have your learning outcomes in hand. Frame the question in an unambiguous and a technically correct way. So your question should be faced in a way that the student is not expecting it to be, but again, it should be correct. Test alternate conceptions, misconceptions, student errors. Use real life contexts instead of contrived ones. Use authentic data, maps, graphs, or any other information. And use age appropriate content, context, as well as language. So I'll be sharing this with you whenever drafting a question. Please keep this in mind. We had discussed all these aspects in the first session. If anyone has any doubt in these particular 9 aspects, you all can wait back after the session. I'll be happy to answer any doubts. And just to end today's session with a review, let's just see if my understanding and your understanding is at the same level. Again, there is a question in front of you. How many think it's a good question? How many think it's a bad question? Anyone? I don't have another meeting till 6:30, so I have all the time. आप लोगों का टाइम 6 बजे खत्म हो गया है. So I'm happy to extend, but the quicker we get a response, the quicker we can end the session.
Sir, I think it's a good question.
Okay, it's a good question. Okay. Anyone apart from Pallavi, ma'am?
Yes, I feel it is a bad question because it doesn't provide much information.
Okay, it doesn't provide much information. Nisha ma'am also thinks it's a good question.
Sir,
Deepa
I
ma'am.
think it's a good question, I think, sir. And I
Okay.
think so that vicious circle of part, it can be an answer. Vicious circle and relative, Q and R.
Okay. It's a good question. It's a good question. Okay. So majorly all of us think it's a good question. Pooja ma'am thinks it's a bad question. Pooja ma'am, Sonia ma'am, why do we think it's a bad question?
Sir, I agree with Vrunda ma'am. I feel it's a very vague question and it's not providing much information. So my mind is thinking in all directions.
Okay, it's vague. Okay, fairly enough.
Yes, the same here. I don't think you need to ask such a. The first sentence, a country is a poor because it's a poor. So basically, I don't think this whole sentence is needed in this question. That's
Okay.
why I feel that.
Fair enough. We'll. Uh, so I agree with some of you that it's problematic. Now let's just look at a better version of this question. Can you see the difference? Basically, there is hardly any difference. But if anyone can see, notice the difference and highlight the difference. What Vrinda ma'am, Pooja ma'am in majorly highlighted.
I guess
Talks about
ambiguity is removed.
Sorry?
it talks about the options. Now it defines clearly that it is talking about only the poverty.
Okay, so this is an example from a very recent session that we were doing where we asked teachers to draft a question. So now what they did over here is a country is poor because it's poor, which is the concept of highlighted here. P, Q, R, and then the students have to see 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then they have to select the particular correct answer. Okay, so now what a student is doing is he's seeing only P. Okay, P means poverty line. Okay, only Q, Q means this. P, Q, and R. Okay, P, Q, and R means this. Versus over here, what the student is doing is the options are directly there in front of him or her, and he just has to tick. So, for no reason, this question that you see over here, which I have termed as the problematic question, was made more complicated in the way it's asked, in the way it appears. Whereas it could be put in a more simpler manner over here. So again, the point and context that I'm trying to highlight is when you're drafting a question, it need not look complicated, just like this question was made to look complicated. But actually it wasn't. It was very fairly simple. Similarly, this question is fairly simple. So when you draft a question just like we did right now, and when I'm saying drafting a question, this is for the idea of exercise or practice. When you start drafting your competency-based questions, just go through the question once and just see that whether it can be simplified. The idea is to make the question more complex in the outcomes that we are wanting to achieve, not in the vocabulary or in the way the question is framed. Is that thought put across clear? Great. So with that, I end today's session. Thank you so much, everyone. I have a complaint from all of you. The last two sessions that we have shared an assignment with all of you, we've received very few responses. So right now, today, you will be receiving a link after this session. That link will have a message which will clearly say that this is an assignment and not a feedback form. So please, whenever you have time, it will take you less than 10 minutes to complete. Please complete that assignment. It helps us, it helps me to understand your understanding levels and draft my other sessions accordingly. If all of you know these concepts, then there is no point in repeating them time and again, wasting your time. So once I have your responses, it will be easier for me to figure out the gaps and then answer it accordingly. So please fill in the assessment more religiously. Please, it takes hardly less than 10 minutes, but please give your time and focus to it. Thank you so much. If anyone has any doubt, you can please stay back. If not, have a good day and wish you all a very happy Ganpati festive season coming up.
Thank you so much, Himanshu. It was very informative, and just wanted to add what you just shared regarding the assignment. So we plan to award you with the certificates, but we are not able to because of the data that is coming up. Like very few of you have actually completed the assignment. So do complete and do not add any feedback. Add what the question is asking you to answer. So that would help us to plan the sessions better. Thank you so much, Himanshu. It was very nice and very informative.
Thank you, Aarti ma'am. Always a pleasure. I'll just wait if anyone has any questions, and then on our mail, no WhatsApp.